Hi, I'm Paul from the Studio Rats. Today we're looking at what the differences are between the three classic Gibson guitars, the Gibson SG, the Gibson Les Paul and a Gibson 335. So what I'm going to do is to go through all the specs of these guitars and the feel of these guitars. So if you're looking to buy an SG, a Les Paul or a 335, or if you're just interested in these guitars, I can sort of describe the differences. Now, these guitars are slightly different because these are the custom shop versions of these guitars, but they're more or less the same. So if you're thinking about getting the standard versions, the cheaper versions, say like the Epiphone versions, I think you can pretty much rely on this sort of comparison because we are basically talking about how comfortable it is, the thickness of the woods, and how it sounds. All of these guitars have exactly the same pickups, which are Gibson Custom Bucker Alnico 3 pickups. So exactly the same pickups, more or less. We're not taking the pickups out of one guitar and putting it in another guitar, but they're the same pickup. So we're going to see how different all of these guitars sound. Now, let's start with the comparison, and I'm going to go through each guitar individually, and we'll start with the SG. Now, this is a 64 reissue SG, so this is basically 64 or 1964 specs on an SG. So it's got the tremolo, and we'll talk about that in a minute because it's a bit controversial, I'd say. And the way that the pickups are spaced are different to a normal Gibson. So if you look at the actual amount of space between the neck join and where the pickup is, it's further away from the neck than say like a Les Paul or a 335. Now this is going to affect the tone, and if you're more of a Fender style player, I would say this guitar might be more suitable for you because you can pick up, or I could pick up, a 335 and a Les Paul, and actually being more of a Fender guitar player, you find them a little bit uncomfortable, and the SG is far more suited for your sort of Strat player or Telecaster player. Now playing wise, the SG for me is definitely the most comfortable. It's the lightest. An SG normally weighs around about sort of 7 to 7.5 pounds depending on the specs you've got on it. Obviously some of the hardware affects the weight of it. And the neck compared to the other models is a little bit wider, I would say. So you're going to get more of a wider fretboard down here than here. So it sort of tapers up, and the neck is really comfortable. So if you're used to more of a 60s Strat neck, I would say this is definitely the most sort of comfortable guitar. So let's have a look at the trem. Now, the trem, I don't know why they put it on these guitars. I mean, it looks cool. I think that's about the only benefit of it. It's not the best trem, although it does stay in tune. And it works on a slightly different version because it's got this sort of fulcrum piece of metal that goes underneath that rests on the body. Now that's different to a Strat which actually uses springs. And the thing that I'd say about this trem is, one, the trem arm's in the wrong position, because when you're playing chords, you're constantly sort of hitting the trem. So the trem's either got to be here or it's got to be back here. Now if you look at most people that have got one of these guitars, the trem is sort of back here. But there is a fault with the trem, and I guess you could say that us guitar players don't like to move on with technology, because they haven't obviously improved it with this, because we like the look of the old stuff, or a lot of us like the look of the old stuff. So when the trem's in this position, the trem is sort of pulling, sort of doing that. So if you want the trem to move evenly, it's got to be in this position, which is obviously unplayable. When we're in this position, as I said, what it's doing is it's sort of tilting the tremolo this way. So the treble strings are dipping more than the bass strings. Now if you're sitting down, it's completely useless. Your hand is always knocking on it. So I think what most people do, and personally I think it's for the best, is to lock it back. Now you would say, what is the point of having the trem? It is purely aesthetic, but it is pretty cool. And I guess you could have it back here, but it's pretty useless. And also another fault with it, if you've got your guitar lead plugged in, and it doesn't matter if it's a right angle guitar lead or a straight jack like this one, you have to move the trem back here. And as you can see, if you bring it back this way, it's banging on the tone and the volume pots. Absolutely useless, but as I said, it looks cool. During this video, you'll be hearing clips of all of these guitars playing the same thing, so you can actually hear the difference. In the room, it is far more noticeable. You can actually hear the difference. And what I will say is the guitars sound more like they look. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a Les Paul, it's a solid, thick lump of wood. This is definitely the thickest sounding of all the guitars. The SG, being the thinnest and being the lightest, definitely has a thinner sort of sound. I really like the sound of the SG, but it's definitely thinner. And the 335 has more of a bright sort of woody sound. Now, 335 is definitely more noticeable in the room, and I thought it was more noticeable when it was going to be recorded, but actually what you're hearing when you're strumming the guitar is a lot more of the acoustic properties of the guitar as opposed to the recorded. So recorded, they do sound fairly similar. Now, the Les Paul, this is arguably one of the most iconic guitars next to the Stratocaster. If you think about the shape of a guitar and you're not a guitar player, you'd probably draw either a Strat or a Les Paul. These are definitely what I would call rock machines. These are great for overdriven tones, classic blues rock, that sort of stuff, even to sort of rock and metal. And they've been used by a variety of different guitar players through the years. Exactly the same pickups as an SG, but way more output on these, and the pickups on this are exactly the same height as they are on the SG, but you do get way more output with this guitar. And the only reason that I can think that makes a difference is the construction of the guitar and also the maple cap on it. Now, playing wise, I think a Les Paul is pretty uncomfortable. Coming from a Strat and Telecaster background, they're normally heavier than a Strat, heavier than a Telecaster. and the heaviest normally out of the Gibson range. Now this one here isn't very heavy. This one here is about 8.5 pounds. They can get quite heavy. They can go up to about 11 pounds, which can be a bit of a boat anchor around your neck. But the actual size and shape of the body and the sharp edges on it don't make it the most comfortable guitar. That is why you see most players wearing them quite low, but they do sound absolutely fantastic. Now lastly, the 335. Now what makes this 335 slightly different to other 335s, especially in the more sort of standard range, is this is a 64 style spec 335, which means it's got the inlays, and like my 64 SG, we've got nylon saddles. Now this does affect the tone very, very slightly. I have actually tried this guitar by taking off the bridge from another Les Paul that I've got, which actually has steel saddles, and it sounds slightly brighter, but not as much as you think. So to me, it's not really affecting the tone that much. Now personally, I think a 335 is more comfortable to play than a Les Paul. They are thinner and they are lighter. This one here is about 8 pounds, but they can get fairly heavy as well. And the reason why they normally are lighter is because they are semi-hollow. There's a centre block that runs through the guitar, so a lump of wood that runs through the guitar that the bridge and the stop tail piece is mounted to just for stability. But they do have more of a woody sort of tone. And in my opinion, and listening back to the clips that I've recorded, I think the 335 sounds the best out of the lot. Now they all sound good, but this one has the best of both worlds. It's not as thick sounding as a Les Paul, and it's not as thin sounding as an SG, and the woody sort of tone from it just sounds really classic. So there you go. Now obviously because of YouTube, things sound less different, I guess, due to the compression rate that YouTube imparts on these videos. But let me know in the comments if you thought they actually did sound different, or which one you preferred. And if you've got these three guitars, let me know which one you prefer the feel of, because they do feel very different. It's very different to, say, like a Fender, which you can pick up a Telecaster and pick up a Strat, and personally I feel quite at home with them. And you can pick up a 335, a Les Paul and an SG, and they feel completely different. Anyway, really hope you guys got something out of this video. If you did get something out of it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click on the bell button and you'll be notified of any future video that comes out from the Studio Rats. I'm Paul, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.